This is always something interesting for me when I have the microphone. I don't I don't know what happens. I turn into a different person, I think. Maybe I might like to hear myself talk or something. I have this story. So during one of our experiences, I have a quick FNFP story for you guys. During one of our experiences up at Stanford University, we were all tasked to kind of lead the day, and just so happened we had to partner up with different fellows from Aotearoa uh, and Alaska, the First Nations peoples of Alaska, and what what our kuleana was to kind of steward and lead the day. And so for me, I ate lunch late, and so I was the last guy to sign up. And so the only day that was open was the Friday. It was like the last day of the fellowship up at Stanford. And what I didn't realize was that it was the day for the closing, like kind of the closing ceremonies, the closing party. So we, myself and another fellow from Alaska, this guy by the name of Andre Jacobs, we got tasked to be MCs, and so that was like the worst thing because they gave us the mic for the whole night, and I had a captive audience of maybe about 100 people. What would you say, Uncle Neil? Maybe less, 50 to 100 people, and some of the things at the time I thought was very funny, but some of the jokes weren't necessarily received as I thought them to be as funny. So I got kind of some blank looks and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, it went swimmingly. But I guess the point of the story is, don't give me a microphone and say, have at it. So it's kind of structured. Anyway, ano ai, aloha. My name is Maka'ala Rollins, and before we get into our presentation, I just kind of want to give you guys an agenda of the day. Our presentations will probably take about 35 to 40 minutes, and what we really want to do is kind of leave the rest of the time open to 3 o'clock for a Q&A for you guys, because there was just so much rich dialogue and conversations throughout the year that we were very privileged to be a part of, that it was very hard to capture in a 30-minute or 40-minute presentation. So we're really hoping that the dialogue that happens today would be actually where these good mo'olelo that we've heard will come out. To our esteemed guests that are here, thank you guys for coming. Trustee Wilhelm, aloha. Elizabeth Hokada, she's another. I've seen her earlier. Aloha, Elizabeth. Dean Donald Young from UH, University of Hawaii, as well as Dean Minette Benham. And all of you guys are our esteemed guests, so welcome to you guys all. And I would like to also mahalo our families, because we all have families and they've all sacrificed a lot over this course of this year, and so we'd really like to mahalo them for their sacrifice as well, because without our partners, we would be nothing. As I said before, my name is Maka'ala Rollins. I hail from the island of Hawaii, Hilo, Panaeva. And before we go on with this presentation, I'd like to introduce my fellows that have spent this year with me, gathering and collecting all of these rich mo'olelo. So we have Puhaiku. Please stand when I call your name. We have Puhaiku Kea Schultz, hailing from Waimalu. We have Keala Fukura, hailing from Manana. Marian Ano from Nu'uanu. Mark Ellis from Nu'uanu as well. And Miss Julie Cachola from the Sovereign Nations of Waianae. Yes. Am I? Oh. It's a big layer. What can I say? This. Yeah. Anyway. Well, let us begin. Okay. So. You know who we are, and I'd like to start off with talking about storytelling. So from a Hawaiian context, storytelling is about a transmission of knowledge, value systems, genealogies, worldview, and these things, and how they're thoughtfully preserved and nurtured over generations. These mo'olelo, are so rich and so deep. And if one was chosen to be taught this art of storytelling, he or she had this immense responsibility to kind of process and internalize these stories and make sure that these messages within them were conveyed properly and appropriately. Mary Kavena Pukui, she shares that to tell a mo'olelo, then tales learned were not repeated carelessly or casually without thought, and without thinking who your audience was and when it was spoken. So this sacredness of mo'olelo, from a speaker to a receiver, it has this awesome weight for us as Hawaiians. And in that spirit, I kind of want to talk to you guys about a story, and I share with you. It's about a Hawaiian man. He was looking for an opportunity, and it was an opportunity for advancement for himself, but ultimately it was advancement for his family. He had a college degree. He was active in his community. He had comprehensive knowledge of an organization. So when this man tried to apply himself for a graduate degree to better himself and his position in his career, time after time, application after application, the graduate programs would tell him, not good enough. And not good enough for whatever reason. And it wasn't until this man had a colleague that told him about this indigenous leadership program that focused on building somebody up and building them up from their community and giving them these experiences and working through these communities and fostering this leadership within them. This man is me. The program is FNFP, First Nations Futures Program. And that colleague is William Ava, this program specialist. And I like to share that with you guys because this program is more than just a program, There's all these other kind of fellowship programs out there that talk about, building leaders. But this program took a chance on a person, not about his SAT scores or not about his accomplishments, but his beliefs, his values, his work ethic. And that's the story I want to kind of talk to you guys about today. So, Papa Pilina, that's our Papa's name. And so how do we get this Papa Pilina name? So, the first team building activity that we had was of building a hale pili. So the name Pilina means joining, adhering, connecting to. And this first activity that we had was coming together as a group, as a cohort, and building this hale pili. Pilina has a name built within it, is pili. And so pili is, if for those of you who might not know, pili is also a grass that is found in many warm regions. And it's used for thatching in Hawaiian hale, for the hale pili. But it's also used as something that you can put on a hula altar to ask the goddess Laka for knowledge to pili, to cling to you. So going through this experience and building this hale pili, it was kind of revealed to our cohort that, maybe Pilina was the name, and would connect us not just to what we had to do during the year, but a larger connection to our kupuna and everything everything in this world. So, a story, a journey, and ultimately work that we have to do, right? So, I had spoken a little bit about, we had collected stories, and these stories that we're here to tell you is about not just us, but about everybody. It's this, there's a Hawaiian saying, he pilina vehena ole, this unseverable tie. And it's a tie so strong that it's not easily separated. And so today we like to tell you guys about this pilina vehena ole, this unseverable tie that we have, not just to each other, not just amongst trusts, but to everything that is us. So this is what our case study was, the past, present, and future views from Ali'i Trusts and Hawaiian serving organizations. And we there was some discussion as to, what's an Ali'i Trust? What's a Hawaiian serving organization? How do you define what? And kind of ultimately what it boiled down to was, it was a legal definition that we had asked scholars, we had asked lawyers, and really that this trust kind of boils down to a codicil or a will that is then established with a trust. And sorry, I'm kind of free flowing because I'm just speaking from my na'au, and it's an opportunity today that we can take off our hats, and I wear a Kamehameha schools hat, or I wear a community hat, or I'm a manager, I'm a director, but it's an opportunity for us today to kind of talk as Hawaiians, to Hawaiians, face to face with each other, and just kind of have at it. So in our deciding as to what we're gonna do, what we're gonna look at, with the information provided to us, we decided to kind of look at Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, Queen Liliuokalani Trust, inclusive of Queen Liliuokalani Children's Centers, Kamehameha Schools, as well as the Lunalilo Trust. Oh, and Queen Emma Foundation, let's not forget them. So there are also these key questions that we were tasked to look at. And they kind of help to continue our story and promote that. Looking at long-term goals, how we align our stewardship strategies. But really, what we decided to look at was, where do these opportunities exist for future collective planning, management, and really this area of collaborations. So, but where we landed was that relationships are key. This idea of he pilina vehena ole, this unseverable tie, kept on coming up. It's about a relationship, not necessarily a collegial relationship, but these relationships that are fostered even outside, that go beyond the workplace. And it's an opportunity for somebody to go and say, hey, oh, I know this person from OHA, or I know this person from DHHL. I know him from other places, other contexts. I'm gonna call him up. And it's these ties, these relationships that we have with each other that are created, you know, this trust that we have in each other that makes this ties and these collaborations possible. So one of these things is that today we want to share with you guys these stories and these recurring themes. They've happened so many times and in so many different versions. And you know, stories of a shared purpose, a makia, stories of utilization of spatial information, and the many different stories it can tell. So maps. When I look at a map, I'm like, oh, what is this? I only see dots. But other people, they see this rich information that I would never be able to see. But I know people that can interpret those things, and I can call on them, and they will be called upon later on to explain this, because some of this stuff I can't explain. And also developing a framework for alliance building. And so we'll talk about all these things today, and really, hopefully you guys will see what comes out is deep and is rich. But really it's this mo'olelo, this story about this unseverable tie. You know, we've had the opportunity to go to different communities throughout the state, and we've had this. The reasons why we got into these communities was because of our pilina with them, or First Nations Futures pilina with these communities. Even at an executive level, it was the people that the First Nations Futures program knew. It was the people that our cohort knew. And it was all these different ways to connect, to pili with each other, that enabled us to have these vast, deep mo'olelo. And so hopefully today, you'll see that within what we have to present. Mahalo. Oh, before I leave you guys, I wanna reconnect to that spirit in which Puku'i had said, you know, she taught us about the storyteller. She taught us about the listener, and it's our hope that these mo'olelo are conveyed to you guys in that same sacredness that they were conveyed to us. And if I can leave you with a quote by a very famous local poet and philosopher, Mr. Frank B. Shaner. Grip your shots. Thank you. Mahalo.
Mahalo is tall and vertically challenged. So Maka'ala talked a little bit about the people that we talked to, I think. But I think it bears mentioning that we collected these stories. We're just the collectors of stories. We're the vessel that are holding them together. And they're stories at the executive level of our trust leaderships and our Hawaiian serving organizations. We talked to land managers, and we talked to communities that we had, a small sampling of communities that we had ties to, ohana ties to. They weren't contrived, the relationships weren't contrived. They were relationships based on genealogy. And so we kind of understand that responsibility that we have. So the first kind of thing that emerged from our conversations is the need for this makia. And so I'm putting this up here for you folks to kind of take a look at and let it simmer a bit as I talk about the story and how we got here, the story of how we got here. And so a makia in the Hawaiian dictionary, it can be defined as like an aim, a motto, and a purpose. And in Hawaiian language newspapers, it's commonly referred to as the motto that an ali'i adopted during his or her reign. And so the most well-known of which was one that was declared by Kauikeauli after the sovereignty of our kingdom was returned to us. And that is, we all know it, yeah? And so the power, right, of this shared purpose and of this makia is that it can serve not just as a rallying point for the present, but it can serve as that unseverable tie, yeah, that Pilina Vehena Ole, to connect us to future generations, because we still know it. I mean, maybe we didn't misinterpret it sometimes, but we still know it. And so that really is the power of a shared purpose. And so this is one of the things that kind of emerged from the stories that we collected, yeah. So this is gonna continue to accompany us on our journey as I talk through the story of how we got here. Okay, so this story starts on Molokai, and it starts on our community meetings that we had on Molokai. And we started our morning, spending our morning talking to the staff of Kulana Uiwi. And so, we heard the stories of how its beginnings, and then we heard the stories of its stories of today. And I think the biggest lesson was that it demonstrated to us the potential of our trusts and our Hawaiian serving organizations, the potential of them coming together and what that can look like in a community. But I think the important lesson that we learned on that day is that it was an effort that was community driven and dictated by a community need. And so this was something that we heard over and over again on that day. So later on that night, we're sitting in a conference room at Kulana Uiwi again, and talking to other members of the community. Some of them are here today, and they were kupuna and makua of that place. They were guardians of that place. They were kupa of that aina, and so we felt really privileged to be able to collect their stories and retell it to you here. And we were sitting. I remember sitting there, and to be honest, there was thoughts of hot bread that I was going to eat later, dancing in my head. But I think we really felt something that night, and we felt this kuleana because just of the context of our times. Yeah, we understand, and we understood that night, and I think we understand it now that this is a critical time for our lahui, and that things that are happening now have impacts, in our state and federally, are going to have impacts on our lahui for generations to come that we cannot even imagine. And so we have the potential at an individual level, but at a collective level, to have an impact on what happens next. Right. And so at one point in the conversation, we were talking about the successes of Kulana Uiwi and what were the elements that were there that made it successful. And one of the community members was talking about this idea of this shared, or this common goal, or this common purpose, a makia, yeah. I mean, I don't think that word was mentioned, but this common goal. Then one of the community members goes, oh yeah, just like Kaui Keaoli, and Heau Puni Pula Pula Ko'u. He said it, and it happened. And so, the context of that comment, and I mean, the reality is that it goes far beyond that, right? You cannot just say, my nation is indeed a literate nation, and then the thing happens, right? We understand that it takes more than that. We understand that it takes not just an articulation from our leaders, but it takes buy-in from our community. We understand that after that buy-in happens, there needs to be laws and policies that support it, right? But it also takes the community to carry it forward, carry this idea of a 99% literacy rate forward, And so I think we really understood that that helped us to really think about the power of a makia, whether it's about a literate nation or anything else. And it sounds familiar to us, right? So during this journey, this makia revealed itself to us as we kind of looked forward, but also looked back. Okay, so we looked back, and the way that we did that is we looked at the Trusts and Hawaiian Serving Organizations' missions and visions, and we looked at that as a way to not only find convergences and places where we can unite, but also with recognition that there are boundaries that we have to establish because each trust is different and serves a different mission, right? So that was one way that we looked back. We also looked back at Hawaiian language newspapers because much has been written about the models of our ali'i. And so why wouldn't we look there? That it's a path that's well traveled by our ancestors, right? And so then we looked forward, right? And we touched on that briefly. We looked forward and we talked to the leaders at these different levels, executive levels, land manager levels, and then in our community. And by doing that, we understood the past, present, and future views of what this could look like in our current context. And so one of the things that emerged in these stories is that this is already happening, right? This shared goal and common purpose is already happening, but sometimes it can be temporary or specific to a particular project. And so an enduring, right, and shared makia is how we can establish this pilina vehena ole that we continue to talk about, right? And it's this unseverable relationship between the intent of our ali'i when they set up their trust initially, and it's really talking about the trust and how they operate today, and then how that looks for our future generations. And in the context of Kauikeauli, there's no better example of that pilina vehena ole than the fact that Kalakaua adopted those makia during his reign, right? So there's our unseverable tie, and really speaks to the sustainability of these relationships. And so for us, the thing that was really demonstrated by all these stories that were shared with us is that this is the time, right? And that we can use this makia to focus on the infinite possibilities that exist for our lahui versus the challenges that we face. And the shared vision, it envisions a flourishing lahui where the well-being of Native Hawaiians is cared for by all. But what's implied is that we cannot do it if we don't do it together, right? We cannot do this if we don't do it together. And so I think thinking about a shared purpose and a shared goal recognizes the good works that are already happening in our community. It allows the trust to define what well-being means to them, because it means something different, and it's guided differently depending on the trust that or the Hawaiian serving organization that we're talking about. But it also can facilitate some strategic alignment between the trusts that can sustain us into the future. And so, one thing that I think is important to mention is that we understand the risks, right? We understand that there are risks in losing identity, right? Of trust losing identity. We buy into this one common purpose, and we could lose our identity. We understand, I think, that this requires a bit of a leap of faith. But the rewards, the rewards are that we can see a flourishing lahui, not because we're measuring it by our own metrics and by our own standards, but because we can see it in the faces of all of our people, and we're living it, and we can see it in their lived experiences. And this is really how we go from being good, which is where we're at, to being great.
So as we move forward towards this makia or purpose, inherently the first place we look is our aina, our nexus. That's where we seek to find answers. And oftentimes we find that the aina itself tells the story that needs to be told. And in viewing this landscape, we discover and rediscover that the aina, ways for us to malama the aina and ways for us to malama ourselves. And so, Maka'ala kind of talked about some of the deliverables, some of the products of our fellowship, and we did a spatial data analysis, and we mapped resources that included collective leadership on the ground, which included organizations, individuals, groups. We also did ali'i collaborations, past, present. We also mapped out KS campuses, Aina Ulu collaborations, support education programs, Kamehameha schools supported education programs, and they're all indicated in blue, blue icons respectively. We also mapped out public and private schools. And then, of course, our Ali'i Trust and Hawaiian Serving Organization land holdings, including Queen Liliuokalani Trust, Queen Emma Foundation, Kamehameha Schools, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Department of Hawaiian Homelands. I just want to remind everyone that, so this is just really a first look. This is really our initial spatial analysis of, okay, where are we currently as a people? Where are our resources? Where have we been working? Where is the distribution of our educational institutions or services, on the ground leadership collaborations? And furthermore, where are the intersections? And where are the possibilities? Although collaborations are not occurring directly may not be occurring directly on our land holdings, we know that the proximity to the land holdings is key in cultivating collaboration, cultivating on the ground leadership. And we can sort of use this spatial analysis to identify where is the abundance, where is the lack of abundance, where is the opportunity to build capacity, where is the opportunity, where should we strike next, where should we be coming together as an alliance to work together on the Aina. And also, where is the capacity to build alliances, collaboration. So really, here, my intention here was really to take you through a tour. Here, pictured here is Oahu, just kind of a tour, a bird's eye view of our resources. But the exciting thing is prior to us doing our community visits, we had the opportunity to visit with 4 communities. And this is when the maps really come to life because, here you're behind your desk, you're looking, you're putting layers on, but, it doesn't really mean anything until you actually go out into the community and you talk to them. So on Molokai, we had the opportunity to talk with the community at large, but we did visit with Kahunu Mamona International, and we got to kind of speak with their leadership. And, one of the things that they're sort of talking about their next steps moving forward is, okay, how do they mitigate sedimentation from entering their fish pond? And so we had a conversation of, how can we utilize this spatial data to galvanize support from adjacent landowners? Like, who are these landowners? What are the opportunities for, helping them reach sort of their goal for sustainability, Mauka Makai? Then we had a chance to move over to Keaukaha. And what a privilege to just, it was my first time really being in the community, taken around by people who were born and raised in this community. And it was just so amazing. I was so touched by sort of the genealogical ties that, our friends had in these communities, including one of our fellows. And this strong genealogical ties, this sense of place, this sense of a community that talks to each other, that, is really, talking about the future, very rich in resources, and so I posed the question to the group, how can we, sort of, the time is now, the time is so ripe for us to take, sort of these resources on the ground, and how do we take it to the next level, and that's kind of like where where we're trying to take some of this spatial analysis is we got to talk with the community. We see that their community is resource rich. And so, I think there's opportunity here to, expand these resources or translate it into something that we really need in the future. And then, of course, another shining example, Hano Hano o Heia. Relationships are key. That's what we, keep talking about here, the Pilina, and, not only our Pilina to the land, but the Pilina that we have, throughout in Ahupua'a. So in Heia, there's relationships that, start from the very top, Maoka all the way Makai, with Huiku Maoli Ola, and then you have Kako'o Iwi kind of nestled in the middle, and then you have Pai Pai Oheia Makai. And really what I found interesting here is when we think about relationships and we think about, okay, land ownership, we have, two organizations that are, our leasees from Kamehameha schools, and then we have an organization that is a leasee of the state. And so, but despite not having this continuum of the same landowner, they've managed to partner. It hasn't hindered their ability to work together to sort of like mahuahua, to grow that community. And if anyone's been out there, it's just such an amazing thing to see. And so, these are kind of questions I pose. Where can we export this type of model? How can the trust come together? We know where our land holdings are. We know that it's possible to work together. Where can we export this model of Hano Hano Oheia? And I'll have Julie come up.
So did you folks see the dots on those maps? You saw how many dots there were in Honolulu? Amazing amount of dots. Did you see how many dots were in Waianae? Right? Did you see how many dots were in Waimanalo? So this kind of a spatial analysis allows us to look, and thanks to Kapua Project, looking at dots on the map, saying, hey, there's big gaps in Waianae. Let's go in and fill this gap. And we're in Waianae just thrilled that that's going to happen for us, right? So we have Kapua coming in right in that middle there, in the middle of the coast, and can bring a lot of those things together. But when I look at these dots, I don't know about you, but as I look at them, I wonder, are the dots actually achieving these outcomes and objectives that we intended to do? Because they're on the maps. It's our job to put more dots on those maps, cover the map with dots, or are we supposed to be getting some kind of outcome, an objective out of those dots, right? So, kind of like we dove into the dot, right? We went into Molokai's dot. We went to see, what does this dot have? And it was beautiful. It was perfect. It was young people that were smart, that had education, that had value systems in place. They knew what they were going to do. Their kids playing with the kupuna in the fish pond, Their whole setup there, like how many computers? 7, 8 computers. Full-on TV screens, everything. Completely off-grid. With air conditioning. Completely off-grid. Toilets that are contained. So they're out, they're very compost toilets, but you can't smell anything. Amazing. They flush. Right? Or foam, as it were. They're just trying to make the illusion like it's flushing, but it works, right? It's a perfect situation. So I'm like, that dot is good, right? We dive in some more dots, and we're like, John, this is really good stuff happening. We have achieved that, man. We have achieved the point where we have the community champions in the communities doing the work. They've hooked up with each other. They know what their needs are. They're doing this. It's on their own now. That growth has happened now. So I'm here to actually look at, if that's the case then, where's our next step as leaders? I don't know if you heard, I want you to linger on unseverable tie, because that really jarred my thinking. Does that mean that you tied it once and then now it can't come apart, or how can it come apart? It can't come apart. What is this notion of unseverable tie? And when we're talking about it from the ali'i trust point of view, we're looking at an unseverable tie where ali'i was bound to land. There was a role and function there. Ali'i were bound to people. There was a role and function there, right? They're bound to each other. As we went to Mauna Ala, and it's like, oh yeah, unseverable tie. They're all here. It continues. But they look at a lot of the people that tell us Hawaiians we got to unify, right? We got to be united. And I think this has something to do with that too, because each and every one of us has an unseverable tie to the land and water here. That's why we're here. We, as individuals, tie back down. And maybe that's a part about dispossession that got severed when we lost that connection. And what we've been trying to do is get that connection back, right? So I'm saying these communities are actually making these connections in the communities. So here's actually what the trust lands look like, right? And we're trying to go through the trust lands and say, oh, there's adjacencies, we should circle here, focus there. There's no place that we all align together. We're not co-located any place, okay? There's some places that two agency, elite trusts are co-located. I know you can't really see this, but the idea is that we got quite a bit of land up there. But it's interesting to note that there are 2 trusts, 3 trusts that really don't have a lot of land out there. And it's almost like their skin is not necessarily in the game because they're not at the level of volume we're at on acres. So we're looking at this, and then all of a sudden, we did this. We made them all one color. We made them all one color. We did not distinguish between whose lands were. These are our trust lands. This is where our inseparable tie is going to be anchored to. Now, what happens when you go at this level? Instead of, the dots that we saw, that's what our problem, Marion and I had a problem with. How are we going to show these dots? We're going to have to crop it in close. You're going to have to go down and see the dots to see how many dots. You can't project it at a state level like this. So how do you tell this story, right? But really, that's the problem because you're in the dot, and we're doing our thing. But watch this. We're able to step back and see this as a big picture. Now we can see things systemically. How do water systems work? Where does the water source come from? Where does it have to go? Does it have to traverse through our land, their land, whose land? Can we capture it? Can we hold it? Can we store it? Shouldn't each Hawaiian community, oh, by the way, and it would be good to have the Hawaiian population there, but, I still have to work out that Census Bureau and, the American Fact Finder is still very elusive for me. I'm just trying to get that down. But, so the people who should be there, juxtaposed, yeah? But even without that, we're looking at systems, at water. We'd start there, and what can we make of it? If we're looking at our soils, where's the most, we were Peter Vitusik and Kamana, it's like, where are the most productive, the greatest ag lands for our future? Save that, couple that as the future ag trust, right? Where we have undeniable kuleana too, our historic sites, our vahipana, take that. Right? Couple that right away, off the top, right? That's ours. There's a state historic preservation office that take care of state historic preservation stuff. Maybe the trust should look at Hawaiian historic preservation, and we take care of our stuff, right? So when we take this look back, we can look at bigger things, systemic things like water, like agriculture, sustainable agriculture, like it really counts, linked up to the water. And maybe some of our historic preservation, cultural centers. And there's one last thing I want to leave you with. So when we are able to look at our lands like this, or when we're able to look at our mission as being an inseparable tie in so many ways, have we broken any laws by changing the color to one color? Have we broken any laws? No. Have we endangered our mission in any way? No. It's not that hard to open this up, and sleep on the inseparable tie part of it, sleep on the fact that our community, ultimately we're talking about the well-being of our Hawaiians. Simple. That might give us new ideas for tomorrow. Thank you.
I think we did a poor job of figuring out who should go when because it's all height different. Should have gone smallest to tallest. So, we're gonna switch gears just a little bit and bring it back to looking at the shared vision, the makia that we talked about, and really figuring out how that shared vision ties into the potentiality that both Marion and Julie shared through the dots and the map and the red. And really looking at the future and how to bring that vision, which is very big and abstract and philosophical and we can get lost in all day, into an action plan. And basically, as Maka'ala had mentioned, we were very fortunate to be able to talk to a whole spectrum of our community. And we spoke to executive leadership. We spoke to staff from the trusts and from the Hawaiian serving organizations. And we spoke to key community members. And one of the things that we asked them, I know we didn't put our whole list of questions, was what were key elements that were necessary to enable collaboration? We didn't say between trusts, we didn't say between you guys and the community, we just said to enable collaboration. And from the very beginning, these points were apparent, and then they kept hitting us over the head with it in different ways. So it would be a real disservice to our community and to our executive leadership not to listen to them. So we're just as Pohai said, sharing it back. And I'm really sorry if you cannot read it, so I'll read it to you. The key components are third-party facilitation, engaging in intentional public relations, identifying laws and policies that enable collaboration, implementing professional development strategies, and mobilizing and encouraging community engagement. And I know it's really ugly and I made a pie chart, but it's because I wanted to show that these points are equal. No one is more important than the other, and it cannot happen without each of these points. Red dots. No worries. All right, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of background with the next few slides that Mark and I are going to cover. They're all gonna start with a quote, and I want you to look at the quote at the top because, like we said, we're storytellers. We're bringing this back to the people who were kind enough to share their mana'o. And the story of third-party facilitation begins with one of the executives who actually is here today telling everybody that, we can talk all day about this, and everybody can agree in a room to having a shared vision and having shared messaging, and it's nice if we all work together. But it doesn't really mean anything until everybody puts some skin in the game. But we changed that quote a little bit because of all of you here today. Each and every one of you here, and each and every one of the people who shared with us, has skin in the game. You're here. You took the step to come and listen and to invest your time and your energy in trying to bring this to fruition. So what does this mean to us? This means that our trusts need to develop a third-party, let me back up a little bit. That in addition to your interest here today, we need to keep that interest going. And the way that the trusts can do that is through working together to have a third-party collaboration or a third-party organization entrusted specifically with the task of facilitating collaborative activities to strengthen the alliances between them and to put vision into action. And it sounds really scary and it sounds really weird, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities. As two of my colleagues have already shared, Kulana Oiwi is an example of third-party collaboration. It's an external organization that came together out of community need to bring trusts together to serve a very specific purpose in a community. So the way we envision a third-party organization could be separate, like Kulana Oiwi, or it could even be a joining of trust staff to come together to work on specific projects and to identify collaborative opportunities between each other. One of the things that I think is really important to note is that Kulana Oiwi is tied to a specific location, and it's a very specific need identified by a community. But what we're suggesting is something that ties more to the vision that we're sharing and to Pai'aina collaborations. All right, one of the most powerful concerns that we heard from the community, and I'm sure our executive leadership and even some of the staff may be familiar with, is the need for PR to communicate communicate between the trusts, the Hawaiian serving organizations, and the community. Because people feel that that doesn't happen enough or in a very strategic manner. And so what we're suggesting is that we engage in intentional public relations. And this ties back to our history of storytelling. What we mean by a strategic message or intentional public relations is strategic messaging at the right time to the right audience and in the right way. And I'd like to share with you a story about Kilkaha. So sitting around the table with our Kilkaha community stakeholders, they were sharing with us their successes as a community, and they were talking about one of the programs that they had that were on trust lands and then adjacent to another trust entity. And one of our, I don't know if you all know this about our fellows because I don't think we shared this, but most of us represent or have represented one of the trust or li'i serving organizations. And one of our fellows mentioned, well, that's happening by our land, how come we don't know about it? And they said, oh, because you guys don't need to know about it. We get them, we're doing it right now. We don't need you guys, we don't need your help. And so that to me is a really good example of specific strategic messaging. The right people knew what needed to happen, and the right people made it happen. Not everybody needs the same message. We're not saying that we have a blanket makia, and that's fine. But to make that makia happen, we tell specific stories to specific communities to engage them. All right, I know the title on this one is a little scary. The story is a little long, so I'm going to spend a lot of time here. Backing it up to our Ahanawalalepa, we were fortunate enough to have one of our executive leaders share very openly about his frustration in having his own staff try to achieve their outcomes, because all of us are bound to, we have these outputs, outcomes, and measures, and he's trying to get his staff to get this thing done, but they can't because they're trying to work just within themselves, and the measure actually requires everybody to work together. So he's going, how can I ask my staff to do this if we can't ask the other staff from the other trusts or our other community members to even do this? We're stuck in our own little box. And he said, in his frustration about finding a solution, he said, I don't know, maybe we should just create the Hawaiian Mafia. And then he left, actually, right after he said that. And we all laughed, like you guys, or some of us went, ooh, a mafia, that sounds really scary. I don't know what we mean by mafia. But then if you think about it a little bit, there's a little truth to the statement. If you think about what he had intended when he said that. Mafias have several key components that I think we can all get behind. One is familial ties. Two is shared objectives. And three is an internal code. And what it really, really comes down to, yeah, you can get behind that, right? I can get behind that. Legally, I can get behind it. Enforcement, I didn't think about that, sorry. Put that on that too. But what it really comes down to is a shared genealogy. Mafias are often families also. So a shared genealogy in both inception and in mission. And preserving the interests of a specific group. And in this case, it would be Kanaka Maoli, our people. And this is not a unique concept to mafia or to this particular executive, because those guys over there were doing it already. And guess what? Our li'i before them were doing it already. They were working together, establishing ties, connecting and creating this Pilina Vehna Ole and building upon it, making that tie unbreakable. So how do we begin to even get past the roadblocks that were described by this executive? We actually had a really good example from our DHHL staffers, who I think one of them is here today. Thank you, mahalo. And it was start small. Start with maybe community work days where we can all come together, or maybe strategic staff people can come together and work the lands that we all hold. All the red that Julie shared with us. We can all go around and ka'ahele and work on the land, possibly building pili grass houses, and identify, share our day-to-day work and areas that we can share work, and maybe, what's preventing that from happening? But even more importantly to just talking about it is once you identify areas where there are potential roadblocks, being able to have an open relationship with executives to share what the roadblocks are and trusting that your executive leadership will work together to remove those roadblocks. Once we can work between our own organizations, we can snowball this out into working with our communities in a more meaningful way. And then working to create state-level policies that we can share together. And then working to create federal policies, or even if you want to dream really big, which is great, and actually possibly potentially happening now, international level policies. I mean, you can go all the way out once you start small. I think the thing here to also remember is that we have potential areas where we can focus on removing roadblocks. Julie mentioned VITE and resource management being key for all of us. Access to land is another one. And really developing, if you looked at that map, developing long-term strategic acquisition opportunities between our organizations. That's where the potential is to really preserve our well-being as a people. And I want to bring it back to a quote that we had from Nanakuli, where if we're able to create this precedent of success and build upon these successes, we have the potential to not just play the game that we're being told to play. We have the potential to change the rules of the game. And then eventually, what we also have the opportunity to do is to change the game entirely, which is our ultimate goal. I'm going to hand it over to Mark now.
Mahalo. Increase the mana, professional development. A famous Hawaiian scholar, Francis Ching, once shared with me about power and how the Hawaiian people looked at power and how they looked at the Aina. He talked to me about the importance of relationships and how the Hawaiian ali'is made it purposely. They made it purposely so that they could build that relationship. When they made it, they would bring together those two family ties. And now they would have that common bond of relationship. There's a place on the east side of Oahu, He'ia, where it shows a very good example of this relationship. In He'ia, as was mentioned, we have various organizations that are serving our Native Hawaiian people. In those organizations, we have Paipai o He'ia, Kako'o o Iwi, and Papahana Kua Ola. And in He'ia, they have the Ahupua'a of He'ia internship program, which is taken care of by Paipai o He'ia. This program allows learners to come in and work across these three entities and learn from each other. More importantly, they learn from the organizations that they're touching. It's a template or a model like this that we propose to the Trust and the Hawaiian serving organizations. Using this type of model where you're working together will create that pilina, create those relationships. We'll have that common bond as a child. Another program is FNFP. As was mentioned, several of us, we all work for different organizations, but imagine if there was one fellow from Queen Emma Foundation, another fellow from Kamehameha Schools, another fellow from OHA, another fellow from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, another fellow from Lunalilo Trust, and another fellow from Lili'uokalani Children's Center. Imagine that. And imagine if their project tied into what would help us as Native Hawaiians and increase the well-being. That's powerful. My next section is energizing the communities. Community engagement. When our task was given to us to talk about the Ali'i Trust and the Hawaiian and how they work together with Aina, immediately what came to mind was Molokai and Kulana o Iwi. These trusts all working together on a common cause. And I said, all we need to do is get more Kulana o Iwis. Fill those dots with the Kulana o Iwi. You know, I would go over as a child, spend time with our ohana there. And I said, perfect. Molokai got it already. Kulana o Iwi. But what I learned when I got there from Uncle Billy, who was there from the start, was that each community is different. What works for Molokai may not work for another community. What works for another community may not work for Molokai. And what needs to be done is that you must engage with that community. You must understand that community. You must understand their needs, because they are the ones in the community. They know their needs. As such, we sat down with our community members. We listened to them and what they had to share with us. They shared with us their struggles, they shared with us their success, and the success of the trust and the Hawaiian serving organizations, what worked well. Each one of us, we all are busy. Each one of us are individuals. We all are unique in our own ways. Isn't it an important thing that we can do is to share our time? And that's what we're asking for in this community engagement. I look past on this past year and how busy we were as fellows and how busy we are in our various opportunities that we have in our lives. The one key component that is not infinite is time. I look at my family, and I'm gone all the time. And I'll probably be gone for a month or so, or more, on a canoe. But the value of time is key. And that's what our communities are asking for. And that's what our families are asking for, our ohana are asking for. They're asking for that value of time. Would it behoove us not to give them that time? In conclusion, we talked about three things. We talked about the shared vision. We talked about the utilization of the spatial information. And we also talked about developing a framework for alliance building. I'd like to end with a quote, or excuse me, with what we started off with. And this is the importance of storytelling. We started with storytelling, we'll end with storytelling. As Tutu Pukui says, storytelling is important. It's sacred. It's something that we must take of high importance. For us, the receivers of the stories, when we went into the communities, when we sat with executives, when we sat with the land managers, received those stories, and now we're retelling those stories. You as the receivers in the audience, you also have an obligation. You have received our stories. What will you do with our stories? How will you make a difference? We thank you guys for your time, and we appreciate spending this time with you, and we hope we built a Papa Pilina. Mahalo.
So many precedent. I mean, for years and years, we've been working together. You know, and it was been informal. The HSI, the Hawaiian Serving Institutes and Services have been meeting, I mean, decades, really. But it was purposefully informal. So they get together, share what's going on. It's an FYI thing. It wasn't a lot more than that. But because of that, you know, it's kind of more, it hasn't taken the next step. There's examples of Kamehameha preschools coming into Hawaiian homelands, right? And serving our homesteaders in, you know, with the preschools coming in. There's a lot of examples of that kind of land collaboration. So we've been doing it all along. we're kind of saying, let's put a little point on this. Let's make it a more deliberate kind of effort.
Maya, you had a question?
Easy question. So all those red dots and combined all together, about how much is that? How much acreage or?
Julie knows this question.
Actually, the question is not so much acreage you want to know. You want to know how many programs and services, and that would be like the.
I don't have the numbers in my head, but we actually did create tables of all the dots per by moku. It's a range from 2 to in the 100. So yeah, it's gonna be in our report. So for sure everybody will be able to see it. Yeah.
Bodies, acreage, programs.
Yes. Oh yeah.
The combined acreage is startling. It's 828,000 acres. So as a planner in Hawaiian homelands, I look every day, I see 200,000 acres. By just changing the color to all one color, I am now looking at 800,000 acres. That was very revealing. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. That was very revealing. It's a lot of land. But it's order of magnitude, a different perspective.
Aloha. I wanted to know whether or not your end products have a list of the collaborations that we've had in the past. And the reason why I ask that is because obviously moving forward, we look at the types of successful collaborations that we've had. It gives us an idea of what things have worked and what have not.
Short answer, yes. Next question.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Awesome job, by the way. Awesome. My question has to do around fiduciary responsibilities. So all of these trusts have fiduciary responsibilities, as we know. What's your thinking on how you might incentivize strategic collaborations? What kind of returns have these various trust leaders talked about that they're looking for or are already measuring?
Oh, good one. Julie has off the top of the head.
Yeah. So one thing I want to do is look at the assets that each bring to the table, right? So we want to be able to share, for example, Hawaiian homelands, our ability to zone our own lands, and we want to be able to share our affordable housing credits, and be able to also look at our reservation of water that goes first, and how do we line up those kind of how do we kind of get behind those things? So we just don't know how to do that, but the centers are on the table there,
So I want to talk about two things then with regards to responsibility and individual kuleana. We were at the beginning looking at it at a deficit perspective, as it's limiting because I can only do this, and I can only do this, and I can only do this. But if you think of it as more of a skill set where I'm really good at doing this, and working together in those ways that overlap, we started to talk about it more in that perspective. And looking at those and coming from it as, I should back up, I used to be a grants administrator for OHA. And what happened a lot of the time, and we didn't know it in the beginning, but we know now, is that people would get resources from OHA, and then also resources from Kamehameha, and then maybe some beneficiaries from DHHL. And we kind of knew it was happening at an informal level, but as we looked at our data, particularly Kamana'o is very focused on getting a better wrangling on this. Looking at our beneficiaries as combined resources and looking at how having people and Kapua, having people on the ground from DHHL working with KS and not necessarily duplicating services, but maximizing services between us because we share the same kuleana to our beneficiaries. I think we need to do that. We need to do a little more digging on how to do that effectively because we're still in the real beginning stages of that. We still overstep each other some of the times and really step. I'm just speaking from my mana'o, from where I've come from. And sometimes we go into places where we're not very good, and really try and focusing more on the where was I going? The beginning part, what we're good at, yeah, which is clearly not public speaking.
Maybe I can give a specific example too, yeah. So we were talking to OHA land managers and they said, hey, you know what? We can lobby and we can do laws. Like, I mean, we can do laws, but can anybody else do that, right? So that's the incentive, right? That's the incentive for other trusts. Like, okay, what kind of law you need? I mean, it's not that simple, but what kind of law you need? And right, sorry. And what can we do, right? But it also requires us all to work together. It's not. I don't think that it's feasible to say, hey, OHA, can you get us a law passed, and then we're just gonna watch you do it, right? I mean, it kind of goes back to this idea that we cannot do this if we don't do it together, and that's the incentive. I think that's one example of how we incentivize it. I think.
Aloha. Mark was saying in his presentation that at the end that it was really important for organizations like ours to engage with communities. But when I looked at the different communities you were engaged with, you all come from there. You know, you have Kilkaha people, Waianae, Kaneohe, He'eia. And so I was wondering, did FNFP recruit you specifically because you are rooted in community? And I mean, do you feel as though that was an important consideration for your being selected to this?
I didn't, yeah. To Kiala's point, Kiala's whispering to me, I didn't consider that to be a factor. And perhaps it was. I think of Uncle Neil and BJ saying, oh, you think you guys got selected because of this, or you think you guys got selected because of that. And really, maybe it was a largely orchestrated plan. But I never know about them. They never tell me. So, yeah, well, perhaps, but I definitely as we mentioned earlier, that the reasons why we selected these communities was because of this pilina that we had with them already, and it was very apparent that when we went into those communities and we put out that kahea, we put out that call, that people came out. You know, it was awesome to see, and it was a great experience for us. So thank you, Uncle Neil. He'll probably go, yeah, I planned that all along, but we weren't aware of it.
Sorry, I just have something to add. I have no doubt that it was intentional. The smart bugger sitting over here. So I have no doubt that it was intentional, and I think the biggest lesson that we learned, or something to keep in mind, is that our conversations with the communities that we went to is just the start. We were constrained by time. We had very little of it, and so I think we recognized that we started from our own place, right, from our own relationships, but that there's so many more community conversations that have to happen moving forward. Oh, Julie has something to add.
Sorry. What was interesting is that I go to communities a lot in my regular work, but this time I got to go out to talk about the Ali'i Trust, and it was very different. And I got people were excited. We're like, "What? Really?" And so the message. I just want to say there's a lot of interest now to talk about this. It's at the top of people's minds. Because the reason why we got that kind of turnout is because people are thinking about it. It's already happening in our community.
Next question.
Okay, mahalo. Great presentation, and liked hearing all your individual mana'o about the work. One of the recommendations you guys had was, I'm kind of summarizing, but it was about Ali'i Trust collectively, strategically acquiring certain aina together. And, I think that's a great recommendation, and I wanted to get you guys' thoughts. We've seen that, like in Kapua, we had attempts at acquiring land that didn't work out. Waimea, in Kona, there was an attempt to get land by Kea specifically. So what were the what's your folks' guidance to these elite trusts when trying to make these deals happen? And what do you guys think about metrics, like what common agendas, when should we strategically acquire? Because other people are buying up our land all the time. So I like the recommendation.
Well, I'll go briefly. Speaking from, I know internally within Kamehameha, we acquired lands that were significant. In our dialogues with Ulalia and Uncle Neil, I know that we, on a Kamehameha side, that we had acquired lands that were culturally significant to Kamehameha. Areas where Kamehameha Paea were born and raised, and those significant areas where we didn't have necessarily the land, but we strategically acquired them, and it was for the sake of them being vahikupuna and our vahipana that these stories, these awesome mo'olelo are tied to those lands. So it behooved us to actually acquire those lands just for that mana and that olelo. Julie?
I work for Hawaiian Homeland, so I know a little bit about like selecting lands well, right? And we're looking at our land base, and it's a deficit model. We're trying to figure out, what to do. But to me, it's got to start with the water. When we went to your folks' place in Waipio, it was just incredible that water was everywhere. It was just flowing down, and I couldn't imagine, like, just so much resource there just by virtue of the water coming down everywhere. And so that was the richness. So to me, we have to look at water. When we think about in Hawaiian homelands, teaching people how to farm, how to be excited about farming your land, and the water's coming out of a spigot. It's a hard thing to compute sometimes. So it's like, how do we bring that natural flow down? That's where we get free water, by the way, right? Because as soon as you put in a pipe, then you got to pay for it. But if it's just flowing out, then that's free water. That's public trust. So we need to keep that water flowing so that we can tap it, we can use it for free, we can, for agriculture, and then the lands that follow. We really need to look strategically at this, guys. Really strategically. Economies of scale. How much areas do we need to make, our waterworks projects worth it, right? So it's the time. You're right. They're buying these lands as we speak. So we need to start looking at that strategically, very strategically.
When we first heard the kahea to come and join you guys at a community meeting, the first thing I saw was leadership training program or something like that, and I almost put the paper down and doing whatever I was doing. But then when I saw the topic, that really struck something in my brain, because the topic was so important today, and it's so far-reaching that I had to go. So I went, talked your ears off, and then now I got an invitation to come back. And I said, wow, I gotta jump on a plane and go all the way over there to watch these guys graduate. And I said, I don't know if it's worth it, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to come. The topic that you guys have picked has so much importance today for us as Hawaiians. So I'm speaking from the people on the grassroots level. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there making it, and we have to make it in order to survive. But there's so much room for improvement. There's a lot of suffering going out there. We're losing all of our natural resources. We got to depend on the money because we can't depend on our natural resources anymore. Things are going downhill, and it's going downhill for us as people and for our environment and for our lands. So somehow we needed to figure out how to change that. So when the Office of Hawaiian Affairs put out a call for Hawaiians to come together for unity under the banner of sovereignty and independence and those kinds of things, it struck a chord in the community. People were sick and tired of fighting with each other, sick and tired of going after each other, and you tend to do that when you're on the bottom. So the indications for us as Hawaiians is that there's so much room for improvement. So we have this love-hate relationship with our elite trusts. We love it when we get picked to go to Kamehameha. We hate it when we don't get picked to go to Kamehameha. you know, and it goes, depends who you are and what the relationship is, but we're talking now in the Hawaiian community because of all of the suffering, of this whole idea of standing up on our own 2 feet, to stand up and to avenge what happened to our queen and to protect the downward slide that's happening in our islands. So when OHA put out the call, lots of Hawaiians came, and the empty seats was the Ali'i Trust seats. I did not see any of the Ali'i Trust putting their okolis on the line to come and join this whole movement to stand up again as Hawaiians. And it's going to be almost difficult and next to impossible for Hawaiians to feel comfortable and to have the strength if we do not have the support of the Ali'i Trust that has this 800,000 acres, that have the educational capacities to make us lawyers and doctors and everything else, so we can feel comfortable that we can stand up on our feet and not just depend on the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Otherwise, the same things are going to happen that happened to Queen Liliuokalani, not Queen Liliuokalani, but Queen Emma. It's not the Queen Emma Trust anymore. It's a foundation. Who took our trust? When did they take it and who allowed them to take it? Is that what's going to happen to the rest of our trusts? So we're nervous out there as people, and we need to feel comfortable that our resources are going to be used so that we can stand up as a people, and we cannot stand up as a people if we're going to do what she was talking about. This is my kuleana, this is my kuleana, this is my kuleana. So if we could do it on Molokai at Kulano Iwi, we are positive that that's the example that gave us hope, that we can do it and we can use it as a tool to build our nation once more. So I want to know, after my long statement here, from everybody, all the work that you've done something that nobody's ever been able to do, to go out, talk to the guys on the top and talk to the guys on the bottom and see how you can bring the two guys together. I'm hoping that your work is not going to be put on the shelf like many other works and nothing happens and there is no follow through. So, number one, I wanted to know if I could get a copy of what you guys have done, because if they're not going to listen to you guys, we're going out there and push what you guys have done as ways to open our mouth and say, this is what we need as Hawaiian people. Or is there plans for you guys to keep going and doing and trying to implement some of your findings?
I think, yes, you can have a copy. We can finish it. Maybe in 2 years. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so one of the ideas that our cohort has was to go back, report back to these communities. I mean, I think we feel a responsibility to do that. They shared, they were open and they shared their stories with us. And so I think we feel that we have a responsibility to go back and report back, right? Because all we were doing on these different nights that we talked to people was just gathering. We were just listening, But we weren't able to, not that we weren't able, but we didn't, it wasn't reciprocal, yeah, because we hadn't collected all of our information yet, right? So our goal is, if we can get some funding, is to go back out into the communities and report back what we found.
Another thing is we're hoping to be invited by the boards of trustees and the commissioners to maybe, we're hoping that, the policymakers of the trust would want to hear what we have to say. Maybe they would invite us to address them, to present our findings.
I think I'm the last one, but...
No, Keopu.
Oh, Keopu.
Ki Chang.
Age,
Thank you very much.
Age before beauty. I'm a little older than her. Great presentation. Having been there a little while ago, I know that the last couple of nights were probably a little bit more stressful than usual. So good job. Sort of two easy ones, or just my thoughts of watching, sitting through your presentation, are I think from in my position at KS and some others, it's valuable to hear like, hey, what are your easy what's the low-hanging fruit, things that we don't really think about and it's easy to do. So maybe some easy suggestions from your guys' side, your points of view. You know, maybe like, hey, you can do this here in this community, like Moloka'i or like He'eia, blah, blah, blah. Like a couple shots like that showing your own thought and hear why and what and how. But also, I'd be real curious to hear about what the executives themselves felt were, hey, we could do this and this, or the people that you spoke to. Because that's a little different when you have executives who are maybe feeling it, you know, feeling that gumption to move forward on certain things.
So, you know, just to kind of speak on your first point, I think, you know, I know all of us are involved in community work across the islands, and I think, you know, the first step and the last step is to remain rooted in your communities, to stick with what you're doing, already doing in your communities, become a leader in that community, you know, stick with the work, you know, make it a lifetime kind of goal. And it kind of goes back to what Uncle Walter said. It's like, what is the next step? It's like, you know, a lot of us here have the privilege of working with a lot of the communities we spoke about. And so, you know, the work, you know, maybe it's hard to speak on, like, you know, from the framework level, you know, how the 6 of us will be participating. But on the community level, a lot of us are very active and have that privilege really to be able, you know, some of these stories are our own stories. So just to speak on your first point, it's like, just stay where you are and stay put and, you know, get involved in leadership succession in your community. So, yeah.
He raised a good point. Let's identify this low-hanging fruit. I think that's very helpful.
Plenty low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I'm just speaking, yeah, there's kind of plenty. Well, but one, you know, that is about my section is this, yeah, it's a lot of stuff is already happening. But you know what I really would like? I would like the makia that we sort of put there, and we're holding it lightly, right? I mean, it's just a starting point. I want that to be the next agenda item on their meeting. When the trusts meet as executive, at the executive level, I want them to have a discussion about that makia and rip it apart if you like. If it doesn't work, change it. But at least start having, put it on the agenda. Put it on the agenda. Have it be a little bit more intentional and purposeful. Anyway, one idea.
For me, one of the low-hanging fruits is FNFP. It's already in motion. It will be happening next year and future years to come. Definitely see if it can be strategically and intentionally aligning with other trusts if we do have the applicants, and put that together. Definitely a low-hanging fruit that can come to pass.
Last low-hanging fruit, Ki-Chang. One suggestion that came up amongst all the other people at an operational level, at the land manager level, was, you know, get to build this Pilina, these relationships with other organizations. So, you know, maybe hold it quarterly or yearly. You know, Kamehameha Schools holds like a huaka'i on KS lands. Share about what we're doing. Share about some of the challenges or some of the issues or some things that we're dealing with, and maybe other organizations then can host their own days and they can share what they're doing on their lands and have this exchange of knowledge. But not just knowledge, it's at Pilina building too, yeah. Last one, sorry.
Oh. I have 2 questions. One's by proxy, so it's not my fault. First question by proxy is, did Ko'olave come up in any of the discussions with the Ali'i Trusts and kind of stewarding that line? Okay, good. That was a short one. My other one hopefully is pretty short. I just wanted to know, for those of us who are not fortunate to be employed by an Ali'i Trust, is it I should say not very simply, but kind of simply, as Uncle Walter had said, the accountability factor, or is it something more that those of us who care very deeply about the Hawaiian community maybe devote our professional life, personal lives to bettering the Hawaiian community and see the Ali'i Trust as a method of furthering and progressing the Lahui? Was there any thought to those of us on the outside of the Ali'i Trust, whether it's the accountability factor or something else, and what we can do to help in that collaboration?
Actually, yeah, it came up with our building our army of champions. And then I can talk a little bit. I didn't get time to talk about it in the communications piece, but I actually saw we have a lot of really good communication organizations right now. We have Mana, we have you, and we can totally utilize you. And we have OEV TV. And even OHA has Kamaka Ko'i. I don't know if you guys know, but that's the name of how they brand and do the primetime spots. They did one on the Wai'iha. They did one on why you should care about Pohakuloa. It was very powerful. It was very powerful, Jocelyn. And but utilizing our community members and their strengths to be able to do those kinds of things, the trust can't do that themselves. We're good at, I shouldn't say we, I no longer work for a trust or a Hawaiian serving organization. But the trust recognize that our communities are, rooting ourselves in our communities, like Marian said, is where we need to be headed back toward. And it's difficult when you grow so tall to remember where your roots are. But from what we heard from the executive leadership is they're very mindful of that, and they're very aware and working really hard to try to get back to that place. And I don't know if you want to share about the, we gotta go, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, unfortunately, due to time constraints, we need to end this space. Needs to be utilized by another group. So I'm sorry if you guys do have any information that you'd like to share, email me or William Avo.
Well, we need to end, but we can't end without thanking this group and this Papa for all their amazing work. And I think it'd be easy for Lance or Elizabeth or I to jump up and start and get involved with the discussion, but the whole point of this is we need to pass this responsibility and this kuleana on, and your skin is in the game. That's who I was talking about. And I see a lot of other people here whose skin is in the game, and I'd like all of our fellows, past fellows, to also come forward so you can stand together and be Pilina with Papa Pilina. So would you do that, please, and then we can excuse afterwards. Malia, Keopu, Joss, Mahina, Anu, Hokuao, Pete, Jason, Scott. It's never failed to. It's been invariable that when we come to this part of the presentation and they stress over what it looks like and the what about it, but I've always been most impressed about the who. And in this particular case, you didn't. It's not so much what you're telling us to do; it's how you're modeling for us to think. And really mahalo you for that. And if we can think like that, one place, one Pilina, yeah, one group, one unseverable tie. So this fellowship is an amazing group, and yes, you were chosen because you're nested in community. You're not about building your resume. You're about how do we make an investment in you so you can multiply that investment, multiply a return by investing in others. And we have full confidence that you will continue to do so. And so mahalo for all your efforts. And okay, we're gonna clear the room for young people, get out of here, but next generation coming in. Thank you. Oh, photo op. And thank you all for coming.